Okay, so let's continue our discussion on teaching numerical analysis. So, as I said, my course is structured into 6 modules, and today in particular I want to discuss the first 3 modules: the abstract equation forms in modeling, fundamentals of vector spaces, and problem discretization using approximation theory. So, we have done some discussion about module 1. I am not going to go into details. I want to discuss module 2 and module 3. The remaining 3, the solving linear algebraic equations, these are tools, and these probably all of you are to a large extent would be familiar. So, there are some different aspects which are not many times taught, which in the standard course I will emphasize them, but I am not going to spend too much time on last 3 modules discussing today, because they are more or less standard material with a few other things thrown in, which I will explain. But I think the discretization, problem discretization is something that I want to take more emphasis next, and also something about vector spaces, why I am talking about vector spaces, how it is useful for teaching particularly courses in signals and systems and so on. Now, so as I said, the purpose of this set of lectures today is more to interact with you on how a different approach was adopted to teaching this subject, and many elements from this are generic, they could be adopted for any other course, which is so. And again, please stop me wherever you have any questions, or we can learn through mutual discussions, and I can learn from your experiences and vice versa. This is one thing that I want to emphasize here, is that the courses that I have been teaching, since my background is systems, I teach a lot of applied mathematics or systems courses. In our department I teach introductory course on probability statistics, we call data analysis for second year students in chemical engineering, or numerical methods for a part of this course, a little bit watered down version of this course which I am talking about right now, or I teach this course at a postgraduate level I also teach courses on advanced process control, state estimation, and so on. In most of the courses, wherever it is possible, I try to do this, particularly for the postgraduate courses, is what I call as a storytelling approach or a storyline approach. Is that if many times in many courses it's possible, particularly for control courses, I can vouch that it can be done, is if you can select 1 or 2 engineering systems which can be used throughout your course, okay, as a system which is used as a demonstration of every concept that you teach in the course, okay, then it becomes very easy for the students to relate. Okay, I will give you an example. So, what I would call this as a storyline, you create a story around 1 or 2 examples, that you say that I want to solve this problem, okay, and then we keep looking at different aspects of this problem, okay, you look at your tools, come back to the same problem again, okay, we come back to that problem, look at that problem, so that the entire teaching that you do get contextualized to a particular example, or few examples that you take as I will show you in 2 courses. One is what I have done for this numerical analysis course, and also for I will just quickly show you what I do for a control course. So the idea is to use these 1 or 2 theme examples to demonstrate different facets that you are talking in the in your course. So having such an example continuously at a background in during your lectures, it helps you to actually provide a context to the abstract. See, one thing what we don't realize is that the abstract theory has been developed after many years of thinking. Okay, first the thing started with a real concrete problem. Okay, and then people developed abstractions. The books many times reverse the process. They present everything as if the abstract things existed from the day one, and then some application comes, as application of a grand abstraction, which is not the case, which is not an easy way of learning. In fact, that many times demotivates the students, because they think that there are some abstract things out there which either the book writer or some scientist have discovered, and it is not accessible to me, it's something remote. Okay, if you take a real problem and say that, well, now this is my problem, I want to solve this, what will I do, how will I think about it? Okay, then it makes very easy for the student to grasp the so you can look at multiple facets of the same problem. See, I can take a problem, I can look at the steady state behavior of the problem, I can look at the dynamic, I take an induction motor example, I can look at the steady state behavior of the equations. Okay, maybe I am looking at it from the design viewpoint, how I choose inductances, resistances to get certain behavior. Given resistances, inductances, I want to look at the transient behavior. When I apply a load, what happens to the currents and voltages inside the, or magnetic fluxes. So I want to look at transient behavior. I come back to the induction motor example and look at induction motor transient behavior. Okay, so you can look at the same problem from different viewpoints, from different contexts, and many times in many courses it is possible to pick up one problem and then knit a story around that problem. Okay, I will give you example of a different course, then also I will give you from this course what I have tried to do. Okay, and then we will go further into this discretization process. I will just switch to another. See, I teach this course on advanced process control, and this is a course on well, I have 3 modules there. One is modeling and system identification. How do you develop a control relevant modeling? How do you get, given a model from physics, how do you come up with a model that is useful for controller design, or given data, how do you come up with a model for controller design? So this is the first part. Second part is state estimation, Kalman filtering, observers, Leonberger observers, and so on. And the third part is optimal control. All of you know optimal control. So now what I do is I have picked up this example from, this is a simple system that was published in IEEE Transactions of Control Systems Technology. They have given a model for this system. It's a simple representative, and I think this cuts across many branches of engineering. This course which I teach is a postgraduate course which is attended by students from all departments, not just chemical department, from aeronautical, mechanical, electrical, whosoever interested in control, systems and control, and so on. So if you look at this example, this is an example in which this flow is split between, if you change this valve opening, then some part of the flow goes here and some part of the flow goes to this tank, and whereas here if you change this valve opening, some part goes here and some part goes to this tank. So this is an interacting system. Okay, you change this valve, this tank and this tank gets perturbed. You change this valve position, these 3 tanks get perturbed. So it's a coupled system. It's a thing which is it's interacting. Now I take this I take this example as a theme example. Okay, and then everything that I am going to do later on, okay, every part of the course, Okay, I visit this example faithfully to teach different aspects. See, for example, this model I want to convert into a control relevant model. Okay, so how do I linearize this and get a control relevant model? Okay, so I teach with reference to this particular system. If I have to develop a model from data, I simulate data using this model and try to show them how to develop a model from data for this particular system. If I have to develop state estimator, I show how to develop a state estimator. I mean, I do all the theory and then say that, well, now we'll apply it to this particular system. Okay, I want to do an optimal control, I teach all the optimal control theory, and then demonstration is this particular system. So this is what I mean by a theme example. Okay, I keep visiting this particular problem again and again in different context. Okay, and then that makes it very easy for the students to grasp. So I have some 2-3 different examples. Do I have them here? Okay, so this is just a digression. I'll come back to our original. But this storyline approach is something that I have tried to adapt even for the numerical methods. So I'll just briefly just show you that. Okay, now here this is my module on this is my module on discretization, how to do problem discretization using approximation theory. Okay, so here I am going to talk about 3 types of discretizations. One is Taylor series approximation, okay, polynomial approximations, and then third is these least square approximations. These are 3 fundamental approximations which are used for transforming the problem into computable forms. Okay, and I am going to talk about these 3 approximations in this particular module. Now what I have done is, in fact it partly answers the question professor asked in the end of the last lecture, is that can you solve the same problem using different methods? So yeah, I want to take one theme problem, okay, and then I am going to attack that one theme problem using all 3 methods. Okay, so I want to show them that, well, ultimately when you are choosing a one particular approach for solving a problem, it is a matter of preferences, it is a matter of choice, okay, because all of them are approximate, okay, and if you know the fundamentals you can make any one of them work, okay, you can make any one of them work. That is very, very important to convey, that saying that this is the method. So they should not have a map that, okay, this problem means finite difference method. It is not like that. I can use polynomial approximation, I can use Taylor series approximation. In some context polynomial approximation might make more sense, in some context Taylor series approximation make more sense. So it is context sensitive. It is not, there is no answer to this problem that is this the method for solving this problem. If it was like that, then we wouldn't be required. Okay, if the discretion of the student or the engineer is not needed, then the computer will solve all the problems. Okay, if there was only one method to solve the problem, it is not like that. Okay, so the main thing is that there are multiple methods and all of them can be applied to solve a single problem. Okay, and it is important to give that this thing, that understanding to them. So what I have done for that reason, okay, so I have picked up one example, I will just show this. So this particular example that I have picked up is from chemical engineering domain, because I have been teaching mostly this course in the chemical engineering department. One can pick a suitable example from some other domain. So let us say you want to solve a boundary value problem. So the abstraction of the boundary value problem is this is my abstract boundary value problem. Okay, I think maybe all of you might be able to relate to the abstract form. There is some second order differential equation. I want to teach the second order differential equation solving. Okay, u is some dependent variable, z is some independent variable. Okay, this is I have given this as a operator psi. in some function, it could be linear, non-linear, doesn't matter, okay, some function which is over some normalized domain 0 to 1, okay. This could be length, for example, 1 is the 0 is the beginning and 1 is the end, and then you have two boundary conditions, one specified at z equal to 0 and other specified at z equal to 1, okay. Now if I teach this problem, I can teach a solution of this problem, okay, and this becomes very abstract, okay. So you can of course develop a solution of this problem, which is I am going to do this, for example, first using Taylor series approximation. So I teach them what is this method is called as finite difference method. You approximate the derivatives, you create grid points, and then you approximate the local derivatives using grid points and so on. So we'll not get into details of the method, that you can look into. What is important is that this particular problem, okay, I am going to illustrate this after having taught the method in very abstract form, okay. What I am going to do is I have picked up a real problem. This is some heat transfer in a slab of thickness L which generates energy so this is a real problem which the chemical engineer is going to solve in his or her own practical, so I could have illustrated this using just x, y, z, okay, some u and taken some coefficients and then solved the problem, okay. But instead of doing that, what I have chosen to do is I have taken this problem which is a real problem, okay, and then I have shown how to discretize this problem, convert it into how to apply my method, and this is one way of, or this is one theme example, and then I show that how to convert it into the computable form, okay. Finally, after doing all the calculations, it gets into a computable form which is Ax equal to b, and then you solve this problem using linear algebraic equation solver. Or I have taken one more problem which is some reactor problem. In the chemical engineering there would be a reactor problem. So this particular reactor problem is a second order differential equation. There are some boundary conditions. The specific things are not important. What is important is that, okay, so I have developed here method of finite difference, okay. Well, maybe we can we'll talk about it later. Right now what I want to concentrate on is a theme example idea. So this is my theme example, okay, and this I have illustrated how to convert it into computable form using finite difference, okay, and then what I do is I revisit this problem, okay, I revisit this problem. So later, okay, now as a second method of approximations, I want to introduce polynomial interpolations, okay. So see, at this stage please remember I have not solved the problem. When I said here, let's just go back to this problem again. So when I took this problem, this is the so this is some differential equation for you, this is some second order differential equation. There are two boundary conditions. At this stage I am not going to solve the problem, I am going to just transform the problem. I am just teaching them how to transform the problem, okay, not how to solve the problem. See, so here all that I have done is that I have taken some grid points, I have showed them how to locally approximate the derivatives at the grid points and convert the problem into some computable form, okay. So here the same problem we have looked at the steady state behavior, okay, here this was the steady state problem, okay. Here the next problem was the same problem with time coming into picture. Now this is a problem where time is not coming into picture. So this is the problem which I have just converted, rearranged the equations and said that this becomes this is the standard form that I get from this conversion, okay. I am not going to solve the problem right now. the solution is transformation of the problem using this particular method, that is the solution. Okay. Now the same problem, so these are the set of equations that I get, I need to solve these equations. Okay. So this is the abstract form which I get, ax minus gx equal to 0, this is the abstract form. What is ax? Gx is this, what is a is this, what is x is this. Okay. This is my abstract form which I want to solve. Now when I talk about polynomial interpolation, okay, I will actually take the same problem again and show them how to convert. Okay. So the same problem has been revisited here. So polynomial interpolation leads to a method called collocation method, orthogonal collocations, and then orthogonal collocation. So I have taught this abstract method of orthogonal collocations, and then what happens is that I again revisit the same problem. I revisit the same problem which I had discretized using finite difference method. Now same problem revisited using orthogonal collocations. Okay, so this problem of tubular reactor which is here is actually my theme problem. Okay, this theme problem I am going to use in different context. Okay, sometime to understand a transient behavior, sometime to understand a steady state behavior, sometime as a partial differential equation, sometime as a as a boundary value problem, ordinary differential equation. So same problem is capable of generating variety of different sub problems which I am going to teach in my course. Okay, so I am chosen this one theme problem, and from this theme problem I have generated all the sub problems that I want to teach. Okay, and I keep revisiting this problem again and again in my different chapters, in my different modules throughout the course. I visit this problem wherever it is possible. It may not be possible in every context to do that, but majority of my things I can teach using this theme problem, and I think this idea helps a lot in connecting what you are doing with a real problem, with engineering problems. So this is a very important thing to do. So the same problem now revisited through orthogonal collocations. The same problem has been solved using orthogonal collocations. Then again when I teach about least squares, Galerkin method, and then even though I have not solved the problem, I have shown them the solutions of comparing that what you can get using finite difference of 100 points, probably you can get using collocation points of 7 collocation points, and so on. Okay. So some illustrations are there is to, so what is important is to have some theme problems which you can use to illustrate the main concepts, and if you can choose some 2-3 problems like this, okay, which you can revisit in your course again and again. Okay, then in control particularly it's very easy. You can take a system, show its modeling, you can show linearization of that system, you can do open loop simulations, you can do closed loop simulations, you can do multi-loop control, PID control, you can do multi-variable control, same problem, you keep coming to the same problem. Okay, different concepts applied to the same theme, same theme problem, so that helps a lot. I will skip this which I vaguely discussed earlier. The examples on these slides are particularly from chemical engineering. What is important in the first module is to create examples from your domain and relate them to abstract form. So you should different mathematical models that they learn in other courses are mapped to the abstract forms. So I will just quickly go through each one of them. You can give some examples. I have given here examples from chemical engineering, but you have to search for examples from your domain. Okay, so let's look at this. I want to emphasize on this module 2 and 3. Module 2 I think is very important, particularly for teaching signals and systems also, and also for teaching numerical methods or even analytical methods, say solving partial differential equations or solving coupled ordinary differential equations. These concepts are very, very important. So this is like foundation which is needed to teach many of the advanced concepts in engineering mathematics. So one thing that you need to introduce briefly is fundamentals of vector spaces. Okay, the learning objectives are, understand. Now you might ask me, this is something which is already done in the school, vector addition, scalar multiplication. Where is the need to do it again? Okay, what we need to do here is to tell them that vectors not necessarily mean three-dimensional vectors that you look at. The idea of vector spaces is very, very general, and it is in fact set of all objects which which are consistent or which are closed under two operations, that is vector addition and scalar multiplication, okay, is a vector space. So for example, if you take set of continuous functions, let us say over some finite interval, say 0 to 1, take a set of all continuous functions. If you add two continuous functions, you get a continuous function. If you multiply a continuous function by a scalar, you still get a continuous function. So see, what is the fundamental property of a vector in a three-dimensional vector space? You add two vectors, you get a vector in the same space, okay, and you multiply a vector by a scalar, you get a vector in the same space. The vector might get, it can become longer, it can become shorter, it can change the direction, okay, but these two fundamental properties are there of a vector space. And if you distill out these properties, there is a very well developed theory of vector spaces, and if that theory is introduced in the beginning to the students, then most of the mathematics becomes very easy to grasp as to the question of why something becomes very easy to teach or tell. Okay, so you can start, see, most of these abstract things which are there, they are been evolved from three-dimensional vectors, ideas from 3 dimensions. It's not that they have come out of blue. Okay, basically we have tried to create vector spaces which are more abstract and which are generalization of the ideas that you use in 3 dimensions. Okay, so set of continuous functions. I talked about set of continuous functions being a vector space in the sense that you take a set of continuous functions over, say, domain 0 to 1, add two continuous functions, you get a continuous function, and so on. So a set of polynomials defined over domain 0 to 1 would be a subspace or a subset. Would it be a subspace? You add two polynomials, you get a polynomial, yeah, you multiply a polynomial by a scalar, you still get a polynomial in the same domain. Okay, so you could actually say that, look, just like a two-dimensional plane is a subspace in 3 dimensions, set of polynomials would form a subspace or a subset in a set of continuous functions. And so all these ideas have been actually very nicely extended from the 3 dimensions to abstract vector spaces. And if we give some idea, maybe 1 or 2 weeks of lectures on vector spaces, then teaching a lot of mathematics becomes very, very easy. Even signals and systems, I would say, would become very easy. Okay, so then one can talk about different concepts like subspace in a vector space, linear dependence for span of a vector. Okay, what is basis? What is meant by a basis? Okay, and then give examples of different vector spaces. So for example, I'll just go to my notes and show you very quickly what I have done. So of course there are very good maths books where this is explained. I have tried to put it into context of some engineering problems. So you can get some idea from or some teaching material from this. So here I have taken examples of vector spaces. For example, set of infinite sequences, n dimensional spaces, all of us keep using. So that is important to of course discuss in the beginning. 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions, 5 dimensions, n dimensional spaces. Then the natural generalization is complex numbers. So spaces with just like Rn, you can talk about Cn, complex number spaces with each with elements of the vectors being complex numbers. Then set of infinite sequences. Okay. Now set of infinite sequences. Do we need set of infinite sequences? So the problem is that we should relate. Where do you need set of infinite sequences? Virtually infinite, not practically. Where do you come across? What are the sample data systems? Do you get sample data which is a sequence of numbers? Is it a, I mean, quote unquote infinite sequence? You start at time 0 and if you don't stop your device, yeah, let's say I am taking temperature measurement. Okay, what is the temperature measurement? What is that signal? It's a infinite sequence of numbers. I add 2 infinite sequences. Do I get another infinite sequence? Okay, so all these spaces, all these vector spaces are relevant. Set of continuous functions over 0 to infinity. Are these important? Where do you get them? All electrical signals, you can let the time go to infinity practically, okay, or if you want to take a finite time, if you take 1 year, over 1 year, they are, you can scale between 0 and 1, 1 is end of 1 year, and so you have a set of continuous function. If I record, let's say, current in my building over 1 year, okay, it's some continuous signal which is, or if I take digital discrete readings, it's a sequence over, okay. So all these kinds of signals are very, very important, and then they are practically used. They are all the time around us. We use them for teaching, and so it's important to introduce these spaces, set of continuous functions, set of polynomials, then and so on. Okay, so and then what is a subspace? So what is a subspace in the 3 dimensions? What is a subspace in 4 dimensions? What is a subspace in set of continuous functions? So would, for example, if I take sine and cos, okay, will it form a subspace? Yeah, so all linear combinations, okay. So actually you can introduce these concepts in the context of vector space, then it becomes easier for the students to understand the concepts of signals and systems. So and believe me, all these things are needed in the numerical analysis as well. So deliberately I am trying to emphasize those things which are not taught in a conventional course. So the other things which are, like as I said, the last 3 modules, probably you can pick up the tools. This is something which is different, which needs to be. So what are the, okay, now let's do this before I put the things in the slide. What are the important concepts that, see, this is a geometric viewpoint. So this is where what I mean by teaching the geometric viewpoint. What are the important concepts in 3 dimensions that you need, that you use very, very often? Alignment, as in you want to say parallel, or angle? Would you say angle? Yeah. So one very, very important concept in 3 dimensions is angle between 2 vectors. Other? distance between the two things, and also the length, magnitude of a vector, okay, magnitude of a vector. So these are some fundamental concepts, that is angles, okay, magnitudes, distance between two vectors, okay. Now if you start defining a vector space by saying that set of objects in which vector addition and scalar multiplication holds, okay, or a set which is closed under vector addition and scalar multiplication, then you cannot stop there. You cannot just say that, you know, set of continuous functions is a vector space, because I had two continuous functions, you will get a continuous function. The next question will come is that, you know, what is length of a continuous function, or magnitude, whatever you want to call it, okay, because in 3 dimensions there is a notion called length of a vector. So what is the equivalent concept when you go to this new vector space called set of functions, okay. We need to consistently define the idea of norm of a vector. All of you know the norm in 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions. We used 2 norm, 1 norm, infinite norm, okay. Likewise one can define norms on any other vector space, okay. So it's important to define norms. So let's say in my lectures on this vector spaces, I then move on to see, it's important to give examples in this, even in these abstract things which they can relate to. For example, it's important to show when I am introducing linear combination, okay, I am introducing linear combination. So what I have made it a point to say that, look, if you when you are solving a problem Ax equal to b, actually the solution is linear combination of these 3 vectors. This you can do some algebra and show this. Likewise it's important, see, because if you want to motivate students to understand this vector space idea, then you have to also give an example which is from the set of continuous functions. So I want to solve this problem. This is a typical problem that you might get into engineering. Probably there are similar problems in electrical. So the solution would be linear combination of sines, okay. Now what is important to show is that conceptually there is no difference between this solution, this b1 times vector plus b2 times another vector plus b3 times another vector. These are like 3 linearly independent vectors. A linear combination of them gives me a solution, okay. The same thing is operating here. This is one vector, this is another vector, this is third vector, okay, and my solution is a linear combination of these vectors, okay. So these vector spaces are something very, very general. They are not only for 3 dimensional or n dimensional vectors. Therefore, you can think of every problem in terms of vector spaces, and it makes it very easy to understand a lot of mathematics, okay. So here the solution has been expressed as a linear combination of sinusoidal functions, okay. When it comes to I am just trying to solve this kind of a differential equation which might arise, let's say, in some circuit or circuit analysis, and then what I am showing here is that my solution is actually linear combination of 3 vectors. What are the 3 vectors? One vector is e to the power minus z, the second vector is e to the power minus 2z, and the third vector is, this is a vector defined over z going from 0 to 1, okay. So it's a span of, so the solution is linear combination of these 3 vectors. So linear combination is an idea which is used everywhere, okay, not just for 3 dimensional geometry, okay. Then the next concept that comes is the norm. So what is a norm of a vector? You can formally define norm of a vector using some fundamental properties, that any vector, we can define a norm function if it follows some fundamental properties. These you can look for the details, and then what is important is to start by saying that, well, one norm of a n dimensional vector, this is what you will probably all of us know, we use this 2 norm, right? For a vector we use 2 norm, but the same token I can define you know, I take a set of continuous functions over a to b, minus pi to pi, 0 to pi by 2, okay. We use them in you know, Fourier analysis. So by same token I can define length of a continuous function or a magnitude of a continuous function, okay. So this is done using this integral operator. Why this integral operator will give you length? Because a length function has to follow these 3 fundamental properties. A length function has to be greater than or equal to 0, okay. If you add 2 vectors, then length of sum of 2 vectors is always less than norm x norm y, the triangle inequality, and if you multiply a vector by a scalar, the length gets multiplied by a scalar. If any function that satisfies these fundamental properties is a length function, okay, or norm function, length, it is not called norm in the technical terms, just to simplify it, because the students can relate to length or a magnitude very easily, okay. So this, you know, then it's important to show that, you know, this is a so this is also, this integral is also same thing as x1 square plus x2 square plus x3 square. This integral is also another way of doing the same thing, okay. So and then comes the notion of angle, okay. Some of these things I'll just skip. What is important is the last point, okay. It's important to define some of these concepts, like what is the sequence of vectors, what is the convergence, and so on, but one can skip this if you are not interested. You can directly go to the concept of angles. So how to generalize the concept of, you know, angle in 3 dimensions? So what is done to generalize this? So in vector spaces we define what are called as inner products. So inner product is actually motivated from the dot product, okay. So again one can abstract out and define what are the essential properties that define an inner product, okay. And once you define inner, see, what is the advantage of dot product in 3 dimensions or in n dimensions? Yeah, say it. Angle. Why? Because a dot b is equal to mod a mod or norm a norm b into cos theta, right. So we define angle between 2 vectors using the dot product, okay. What is generalization of a dot product in any other vector space, okay. So it is, you know, it is inner product. So when do you call a function to be an inner product? So there are the generic properties. If you have a function, this angular brackets are used to define the inner product between 2 vectors x and y, and any function that satisfies these 4 properties is called as a inner product defined on a vector space. Huh?
Because with the pulling coefficient from the first quadrant.
No, there are 2 different ways. I have checked this.
Maybe it satisfies.
No. There are mathematicians define it one way, and physicists define it another way. So I too was confused about this, and then I checked with Professor Limaye from maths department. So he told me that this is as long as it is consistent, this is fine. Yeah. So I don't think faculty from maths like this way of defining inner product, but this is consistent. This is a consistent way of doing it. Okay. So you know, you start with inner product spaces. You first start with the dot product. This is what everyone knows. Okay. And then we graduate to inner product in which, you know, instead of just saying x transpose y, okay, I then start talking about x transpose wy, where w is a positive definite matrix, okay. And then how this also will define another way of defining length or magnitude, or sorry, inner product in a vector space. So where W is a matrix which is positive definite matrix. Okay, so this inner product here, X transpose Y becomes a special case where W is equal to I. Okay, and then you go on to generalize this to defining inner product on set of two functions. So when do you call two functions? See, when do you call two vectors to be orthogonal? The dot product is 0. Okay, so same way now now that I have a general notion of inner product, I can just say that now look, I am going to call two vectors as orthogonal if the inner product is 0. Okay, so once you define this inner product idea, okay, then entire notion of orthogonality becomes very easy to explain and understand. Otherwise, as a student, I used to keep blinking and thinking, why this sine and cos, why are they orthogonal functions? Just because somebody came and said that because this integral is equal to 0. So now if I know that there is a something called inner product definition and there are inner product spaces, and then in inner product spaces you define angle using this inner product, then it is easy to understand all kinds of inner product spaces. Then what becomes easy for me in my course after I define these inner products, is what I do is I talk about orthogonal sets. Do you know, all of you know Gram-Schmidt process? Yeah, what is Gram-Schmidt process?
Vectors which are linearly independent,
Yeah.
non-zero vectors,
Yeah, but not orthogonal.
not orthogonal, non-zero vectors
Yeah.
can be converted to orthogonal.
Orthogonal set. So you can start from a non-orthogonal set and generate an orthogonal set. Why do we need orthogonal sets? We don't have to give too much motivation for explaining why do we need orthogonal sets. We keep Cartesian coordinates, which we keep using, is an orthogonal set, very very special, and once you express something in the orthogonal set, it becomes very easy to find coefficients. And so now the question is to explain that look, orthogonal sets using xi plus yj plus zk, okay, and Fourier series expansion of a function are conceptually one and the same thing. You are not doing anything different conceptually. Okay, if you are finding out Fourier coefficients along sine cos, sine 2x cos 2x, sine 3x cos 3x, it's just like I, j, k forms a basis. Okay, this set forms a basis for a set of continuous functions. If you can find out coefficients along I, j, k, you can find out coefficients along sine cos functions. Okay, so conceptually what you are doing as a Fourier series expansion is not different from what you know from 3 dimensions. Basic idea is what you know from 3 dimensions, and it's important to emphasize this. So what I do here is I do teach Gram-Schmidt process. Okay, so this is defining angle. You need this Cauchy-Schwarz inequality. So these are technical names, but actually it finally leads to angle between two vectors and so on. So then what I do is I teach this Gram-Schmidt process, and in Gram-Schmidt process you can show how to construct, given 3 linearly independent vectors which are not orthogonal, how do you construct orthogonal set. So first you do it for a 3-dimensional vector space. Okay, this is familiar, this is taught to them in some course probably. Okay, how do you get orthogonal set from a non-orthogonal set, and then I repeat this on a set of functions. Then I do this on this set. Say I have the set of continuous functions over range -1 to 1. Okay, I have these functions. Say first function is x1t, first vector is x1t equal to 1, second vector is x1t equal to t, third vector is t square, and fourth vector is, these are linearly independent vectors but they are not orthogonal. Okay, how do you construct an orthogonal set from this? Okay, apply Gram-Schmidt process. What is Gram-Schmidt process has been explained here. Okay, we have applied it to the 3-dimensional case. Okay, so the students understand it very well. Next you apply the same thing to the set of functions. If I apply it to the set of functions, what I end up with is, these are the Legendre polynomials. Okay, I get this set of polynomials. I get this set of Legendre polynomials. If I apply Gram-Schmidt process to this set of functions, I get Legendre polynomials. Okay, if I apply this Gram-Schmidt process to, say, instead of domain being -1 to 1, if I take the domain 0 to 1 and I apply the same process to these vectors, okay, what I get are called as shifted Legendre polynomials. Okay, if I take the set which is -∞ to infinity, I take some other set of vectors, okay, apply Gram-Schmidt process, I will get Hermite polynomials. Okay, if I do, and then all these monsters in my own undergraduate courses, I used to wonder how they came up with these polynomials, and then why they are orthogonal and why. But once you know how to derive them, okay, all orthogonality is explained right in the beginning of the course. Then you are free to use orthogonal functions in anywhere you want afterwards. Okay, and the students don't blink when you say that, well, this is the orthogonal set and now I am going to express something in the as an orthogonal expansion. Okay, so these things are important in the beginning of the course. So this is about vector spaces. Well, the norm in particular, I talked about matrix norms, which I need later in my course. Okay, so let's return to the. Okay, so this concept of angles in any set, whether it's a set of 3-dimensional vectors, it is set of polynomials, it is set of continuous functions, it is set of sequences, everything get defines once you do this. These are just fundamentals, these are not some deep theory of functional analysis or real analysis. This is just fundamentals of that. If you spend a few lectures on this in the beginning, okay, then it becomes very easy to teach many concepts later. Okay, so that is the moral of the story here. Particularly in inner product spaces, it's important to teach that it is generalization of dot product. You can give examples of inner products, different inner product spaces. Then this name sounds probably unfamiliar if you don't know Cauchy-Schwarz inequality. It is nothing but A dot B equal to mod A mod B into cos theta. Okay, but in a more generalized form, in a in any vector space, if you teach this, then it's very easy to appreciate orthogonality. Define orthogonal sets in different vector spaces. Develop Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization process. So the students, so what I tell them in the class is that, look, there is no unique way of defining inner product. Okay, and you define your own inner product. You take some weighting function, you define the inner product. Okay, and you don't have to worry about Hermite polynomial. Okay, what's your name? Your name is Sunil. You can have Sunil polynomials. Okay, you define your inner product. With respect to that inner product, you can find orthogonal set. Call it Sunil's polynomials. I mean, what's wrong? So that I can construct an orthogonal set defining my own inner product is is very important. And there are infinite ways of defining inner product. So it doesn't matter. So what is important is that these are not some very difficult things to grasp. You can construct an orthogonal set if you want. So that feeling has to be.
That matrix W has to be positive definite.
Has to be positive definite.
That is the only thing.
Yes. Yeah. Or I can define an inner product. See, when you do this, see, if I am defining an inner product between two functions, say xt and yt, as integral a to b, okay, xt yt dt, okay, where t belongs to AB. Okay, so in the context of electrical signals, AB could be 0 to pi, 0 to 2 pi, or minus pi to pi. Okay, so typically this. Now this is not the only way you define inner product for this. I can define another inner product. Let's say xt yt. Okay, let me call this W A B xt wt yt dt, where wt is a positive function, sorry, a, not 0 to 1, a to b, not 0 to 1, a to b. You take any positive function, okay, you take any positive function, and this is a consistent way of inner product. This is a consistent inner product definition. You just look at axioms of inner product, okay, all the axioms of inner product are satisfied, okay. So you know, in the class each one can have his or her own WT positive function, okay, and you can define your own inner product, and then you can define orthogonal set with respect to your own inner product. Whether that inner product will be useful or not is a different question, okay. Then you can say that, well, look, certain orthogonal functions have become famous because they have been found to be useful in certain context, okay, but that is not the only way of doing it, okay. So this could be another way of defining inner product. So there are so many ways, just like you know, W should be a positive definite matrix, and you can define the inner product. See, many times what happens is, you know, you have a vector which is dissimilar vector. See, suppose I have n dimensional vector, say now x here is different. I am talking about x belongs to Rn. So x consists of, say, x1, x2, x3, xn, okay. Now this could be dissimilar variables. See, for example, this could be, you know, this could be current, this could be voltage, you know, this could be some flux, this could be pressure, okay. A vector can consist of dissimilar elements or components, okay. Now defining a length or defining a length functions simply by taking x transpose x many times will not make a sense, okay. It's good to normalize, okay, it's good to normalize, and then see, if my pressure is expressed in terms of, you know, units which go from 10 to the power 6 to 10 to the power 7 or something, and my current is between 0 and 1, if I take sum of the squares it will not give me meaningful length, okay. So then it is important to have, you know, a length defined x transpose wx, or inner product defined as x transpose wy, okay, where W is a weighting matrix which normalizes different variables, okay, which normalizes different variables. We often do this, normalizing different variables. Then it gives you, you know, a length which is more meaningful than, okay. So what is important here is to so what is important here is, you know, you can give examples of generating orthogonal sets starting from non-orthogonal sets, and then the concept that I can generate an orthogonal set, okay, is, you know, gives a confidence or removes the fear of these orthogonal sets which keep coming across when you solve, whether you are solving the problems through analytical methods, whether you are solving through numerical methods, the orthogonal sets invariably keep coming, and, you know, this removes the, then, well, of course my next module is discretization using approximation theory, okay. Now here what I do is, you know, how do you transform the problem, okay, into a computable form. See, most of the cases, most of the times, the problems that you have to solve are never linear problems, okay. We excessively teach linear system theory or linear theory, but the real systems are not linear, okay. So you have to you have tools probably which are linear, so you have to transform the problem into a linear problem and then solve it. So transformation is very, very important. So before you solve, you have to compute into computationally tractable form, which is very, very important. And then this step is often called as problem discretization. Okay. So in this module I teach how to discretize a problem. Okay. So now once you teach them these vector spaces, okay, then it becomes very easy to say that, well, you are not actually looking at multiple problems, you are looking at only one problem. Okay. Now I will show you this one problem. It is very, very I mean, it might look a grand generalization, but it helps in the beginning. So basically first thing is that you have to realize, the students have to realize that, look, in most of the cases I cannot solve the original problem. It's non-linear, it doesn't have an analytical solution, so I have to transform to some computable form and solve. So the first step is getting a computationally tractable approximation. Now what I have done here is that taken all the problems, okay, and shown that every problem actually you take okay, leave this. Okay, so I have taken all these the standard problems, y equal to ax equal to b, then solving differential equations, all these problems I have taken and then shown that, well, what you can do is that actually there is only one fundamental problem. All these problems can be written in this one fundamental way. It is not that you are solving some 5 different problems, that is not true. Okay, you are solving only one problem. What is that problem? Okay, so there are 3 things involved, okay, in this problem: y, t and x. Okay, y is a vector, x is a vector, and t is transformation. Okay, so once you have vector space viewpoint, it's very easy to appreciate that solving a differential equation is a differential operator operating on a vector, okay, gives me another vector. Okay, it is same as ax equal to b. A is the operator operating on x, okay, gives me b. Okay, and same thing is a differential operator operates on a vector, gives me another vector. So these are the same problems, they are not. So I can show that ordinary differential equation, see, I can show that this is a differential operator which is operating on u. U is a vector, u is because set of continuous functions is a vector, so u is a vector, it's operating on u and it is giving me a 0 vector. Okay, that is what you are trying to solve for. It is like solving ax equal to 0. Okay, so this you can do for any problem. So you take this problem, see, I have defined this dx by dt is equal to f of x t. So I am calling this transformation t, which is this minus which is transformation consists of an initial condition and this operation dx by dt which operates on x. Okay, and then it gives you certain vector as a solution. Okay, so every problem you can actually map it into one single problem, all the problems. Okay, and say that, well, there are any problem, you take partial differential equation, you take nonlinear equations, you take anything, finally there is only one problem. Okay, finally there is only one problem, which is y equal to tx. Okay, and associated with this fundamental equation there are 3 fundamental problems in engineering. Okay, can you guess what are the 3 problems? Very simple, very, very simple. When I tell you, you will say, why didn't I guess this? See, first problem is given t and x, find y. Second problem is given any 2, find the third one. See, given t and x, find y. Okay, it's a numerical integration. Okay, you want to find the area under the curve. The second problem is given t and y, find x. Where do you get these problems? Inverse problems. These are called as inverse problems. All design problems are inverse problems. We are given some desired behavior, we know the transformation, we want to find the parameters that will make it happen, right? The third problem is the modeling problem. Third problem is given x and y, find t. What is the transformation? Okay. See, have you done course on control? Okay, you develop a transfer function model. Yeah, you measure the output, you give some input, find a differential equation that relates input to the output. You are finding the transformation from x and y, find t. That is, so there are three problems. Okay, direct problem, inverse problem, and identification problem. Okay, that's it. Entire. Then many times at this point I tell the student that course is over. Okay, everything is done. There are only three problems and there is only one equation. So don't worry, you don't have to study too many things. Okay, there is a single equation to be studied and there are only three problems to be studied. Now details, there might be different ways of details of each problem, but fundamentally you have a direct problem that is given t and x, you find y. Okay. See, when you say find ax equal to b, okay, you are given b, that means you are given y. You are given operator t. What is operator? A. What do you want to find out? X. Inverse problem. Many engineering problems are inverse problem. You are given operator A, you are given y, okay, that is b, that is specified, you want to find out x. Okay, same thing could be what is the controller design problem? You are given a desired behavior, okay, you are given the model t, transfer function model, you are given a desired behavior, find the input which will give me this desired behavior. No, controller design problem is an inverse problem. So most of the problems in engineering are actually inverse problems. Okay, the other problems that we encounter are modeling problems. So you want to find out the parameters of a model. Okay, so you have some transformation t between some signals x and y. I don't know the model parameters, I want to estimate the model parameters using experiments. Okay, so that is system identification problems. So these are three classes of problems. Okay, and then we start talking about approximations. Okay, so approximations, well, one can skip. So now the question that, well, as I said, the entire course is based on the questions I faced as a student. Okay, so whatever difficulties I had, I am trying to answer them so that my students don't face the same questions. Okay, one question that used to bug me all the time is that why we keep using polynomials? Why do we keep using polynomials? Okay, why not something else? Why are so polynomials so popular? Is it because they are simple? What is the reason? Okay, turns out that the fundamental reason for this is called what is called as a dense set. Okay, this is a little bit technical thing in the analysis. A dense set is a set which is everywhere. Okay, I will give you an example. Don't worry about the technical definition. The dense set is something that is that can be used to approximate other things. The simplest example of dense set that we keep using all the time without knowing that we are doing it is using the set of rational numbers is dense in the on the real line. Okay, there are mathematicians who can, I hope I am correct, yeah. So the set of rational numbers is dense on the real line. So any number, any irrational number can be approximated using a rational number. Approximated, not equated. You can approximate a rational, you can construct a rational approximation to any irrational number. In fact, if this wasn't true, we wouldn't be able to do computing. I think all the numbers, if I am not wrong, that you represent actual computations that you do is using even a subset of rational numbers, not even the entire set of rational numbers. In a computer, when you do, you actually, because you can do these approximations, because you can approximate, you can never represent pi. Okay, you construct a rational approximation to pi and use it when you do calculations. Okay, why you can use it? Because the set of rational numbers is dense in the set of real. Okay, they are everywhere. Okay, so you pick any irrational number, I can construct a close enough rational number approximation. Okay, using and using that I can do calculations which are approximate, but you can do it because you have a set of rational numbers which is dense. In the same way, set of polynomials is dense in the set of continuous functions. Okay, which means any continuous function can be approximated as a polynomial function. Okay, which is a very, very nice property. Okay, that just like any real number can be approximated using a rational number. Okay, you can never get equal to, but you can go close, arbitrarily close. Okay, you give a real number and give an epsilon, you can construct a rational number which is, you know, smaller than epsilon. Okay, that is possible. Okay, so same way, give me a continuous function, I can approximate it with arbitrary degree of accuracy using a polynomial approximation. Okay, this was given by this Weierstrass, I think in somewhere in 19th century. He was a mathematician, German mathematician, very famous. So he proved this theorem that any continuous function, he did not tell how to construct the approximation. He said that if there is a continuous function, you can approximate it using a polynomial function. Okay, this is a fundamental theorem. This fundamental theorem is used, this is like foundation stone of, you know, many approximation methods. So that is why we are going to generate polynomial approximations, and that's why then, you know, how to generate the polynomial approximations, how to do it is using Taylor series. Okay, how to do it is probably using interpolation, how to do it you can do using least square approximations. So Weierstrass theorem doesn't tell you, you know, how to do it, it tells you why you can use polynomial approximations for constructing, for discretizing. Okay, so once this is done, then, you know, what I would do is now explain these three methods, that is Taylor series approximation. So then you know, I have what is Taylor series. So this is standard material here. Okay, only thing is the rearrangement is different. Okay, so this is Taylor series for one dimension, this is what we study in standard course, then the Taylor series in n dimensions, and so on. So, okay, you sometimes have functions of this form, you know, scalar functions from n dimension to one dimension, norm is a scalar function, for example. Okay, and then we need to find out Taylor series expansions. I showed you that we need Taylor series expansions, for example for Newton-Raphson method we need a Taylor series expansions. So we also have to generate Taylor series expansions for n cross n and so on, Rn to Rn, you know, you have to generate Taylor series expansions. So all that you can explain. So this is just the algebra, this is not, and these are ways of approximating, locally approximating functions, and so on. So now what I do is, immediately after this I am giving them application of how to use this. Now Taylor series approximation, how do I use this to approximate a problem? Okay, so if you use Taylor series approximations, what you can do is you can locally approximate derivatives. I think this local approximation of derivatives, if I show you the form, it will be recognizable to you. Okay, I will just put this here. Okay, and maybe I will just draw some things. Okay, so you know, I have to approximate a derivative in some locally at some point. Then, you know, I have this dependent variable u, and this is z equal to 0 to z equal to 1. If I discretize this, you know, using say grid points. So this is my okay, so this is my grid point I, this is my grid point I minus 1, this is my grid point I plus 1. Okay, then the local derivative at this point, I can, if I want to find out du by say dz at z equal to zi, then I can approximate this using forward difference, using backward difference. So if this length is delta z, then I can write this as u at zi plus 1 minus u at zi divided by delta z. This is forward difference method. Yeah. How do you arrive at this? You arrive at this through Taylor series approximations. Okay, or one could use the central difference, that means u z plus 1 minus u z I minus 1, this is z I plus 1 I minus 1 by 2 delta z, and so on. Okay, and all these approximations and just using Taylor series approximations, you get all these local approximations of the derivatives. This is the forward difference, this is the backward difference. Then you can get the central difference approximation. You can do it for higher order derivatives, second derivatives. So all this is a fallout of using Taylor series approximations, and then one can proceed to show how to discretize. So I get this formulae for approximations. I can do it, I can extend it to 2-dimensional case and so on, and then I just show that if I take a boundary value problem, okay, how will I discretize this problem? How will I discretize this problem using finite differences? So this is the approximation for the second order derivative, this is the approximation for the first order derivative, and so on, and then I get a set of algebraic equations when you do this, and then I go ahead and as an example I connect to an engineering problem, okay, from the chemical engineering or whatever engineering domain. So that is very, very critical. Okay, so you need to marry this abstraction and a real engineering problems all the time. If you do that, then there is much better learning in terms of retaining the concepts, because you know why this is needed, where this is needed exactly. Okay, and this could also come in terms of the exercises that you give. Okay, so this is now the details you can see here. So this is Taylor series approximation. Then I have taught further I go and teach interpolation polynomials and so on. So what is important here is that if you notice, okay, I am not, so most of the books will have a separate chapter on partial differential equations, a separate chapter on boundary value problems. I am not doing that right in the beginning. Okay, so they are exposed to, because there are no different methods for partial differential equations. Okay, you are going to discretize it and finally solve a linear algebraic equation, a non-linear algebraic equation, or ordinary differential equation. You convert into a standard form and solve that. You are not, there are no different methods. Okay, so you don't have to push it to the end of the course teaching partial differential equations. It is in the beginning of the course. Okay, that you transform the problem to a computable form, and then once you have a computable form, that computable form can be arising from a partial differential equation, it could be arising from ordinary differential equation, you don't know where it is arising from, and then you just learn the tools to do that. Okay, so that is then the Newton's method also becomes a special case of teaching Taylor series approximation. Okay, and then finally then I move to the second approximation, which is so finally I'll just put this one slide and stop. So what using Taylor series approximations, you get discretization of boundary value problems, you discretize finite partial differential equations using finite difference. Then Newton's method also comes as an example of Taylor series approximation. Okay, so this is Taylor series approximations. Then I'll move to polynomial interpolation. Then I'll move to least squares, and this is my module on discretization. So I have just converted the problems into computable forms. I have not solved them yet. And then I will say that look, from all these conversions, I see only 5 patterns or 4 patterns. Now, how to deal with these 4 patterns? One of the pattern is Ax equal to B, other pattern is, so then you talk about solving the problems from the patterns. But here what is important to see here in this step, still the connection is maintained with the original engineering problems, the physics of the problem. Okay, even if it is through examples, it is maintained, and that is very, very critical. Okay,